So here's the question for today. Can a long-standing communist regime actually survive when its population is going hungry?
When its currency is worthless.
And its final, absolute last lifeline has been strategically cut off.
That question, it's not theoretical anymore, is it? It is the urgent, defining crisis that's happening on the island of Cuba right now. Analysts are using some incredibly stark language. They're describing the country's trajectory as moving toward terminal entropy.
That phrase alone, terminal entropy, I mean, that tells you everything about the scale of this. It's a complete self-accelerating breakdown, the basic parts of the state.
Energy, food, money.
They've just stopped working together.
Oh.
So our mission today is a deep dive into the source material. We're looking at what happens when decades of rigid central planning collide with, well, a very targeted U.S. foreign policy move in the region. We're unpacking a perfect economic storm.
And we have to start with the human cost, because the sources we've looked at frame this as the inevitable outcome of these centrally controlled systems. The data points to an ongoing catastrophe. A staggering 7 in 10 Cubans are missing at least one meal a day.
Let that number just sink in for a second. 7 out of 10. And that desperation is right there in the official poverty stats. They show something like 90% of the population is living in what's defined as extreme poverty.
Right. This isn't just, a recession or economic stagnation. This is total societal failure.
And you can see that failure every single day in the dark.
Oh, absolutely. The sources quantify this energy crisis, and it is crippling the island. Many of the central provinces, they're getting blackouts for more than 20 hours a day. You just can't run a modern country like that.
And that darkness is exactly what's fueling these, well, survivalist protests. We're seeing these spontaneous demonstrations erupting across Havana. People are banging pots and pans.
Cacerolazos.
Exactly. And they're not demanding ideology. They want two things, electricity and food. It's that basic. It's about survival.
And when survival gets this hard, people vote with their feet. They leave. This despair has triggered what the sources call a demographic hemorrhage. It's unparalleled. A recent poll showed that a shocking 78% of Cubans still on the island are planning to get out.
And that's on top of the absolutely staggering number who have already gone. 2.7 million Cubans have fled since 2020.
2.7 million.
To put that in perspective for you, that's a quarter of the country's entire population. The working age people, the doctors, the engineers, they are abandoning the revelation. That's the clearest vote of no confidence you could possibly get.
And the thing that really pushed this already broken system into its final phase, it was a very specific external shock.
Right.
The crisis spiraled after the U.S. military intervention in Venezuela. That was early January 2026. That action cut off the flow of subsidized oil from the Maduro regime.
And Venezuela was Cuba's last friend, its final patron. Taking away that cheap oil was a strategic move by the U.S. that sent the Cuban economy into what analysts are now just calling a free fall.
Exactly. But before we get to the geopolitical side of this, we really need to understand why the domestic economy was so fragile to begin with. We have to start with the currency, the Cuban peso, the CUP. It's really become a symbol of the government's total loss of control.
Let's talk about that self-inflicted wound. Back in 2021, the government tried this big reform, the task of ordering. The goal was to unify their bizarre dual currency system. What was the thinking there, and why did it just instantly blow up in their faces?
Well, the intention was to simplify things, but the execution was just catastrophic. The government set a fixed, totally artificial exchange rate, 24 Cuban pesos to $1 US.
Okay.
But this wasn't some gradual change. It happened overnight. And that single decision represented a massive 2,300% devaluation of the currency.
2,300% in one day. That's just staggering. And I'm guessing the government's own inflation projections were a little off.
A little off. They were completely delusional. The planners, they were hoping for maybe 60% retail inflation. The reality, officials later admitted prices grew 7 to 10 times higher than that. If you look at the broadest measure, the GDP deflator, it hit 401% in 2021 alone.
That's hyperinflation. That wiped out everyone's savings overnight.
Instantly. And so what does that currency look like today? The sources call it a zombie currency.
A zombie currency? Explain that.
It's a perfect analogy because the peso is technically alive, but it does nothing in the real world. It's only used as a unit of account for, state salaries, pensions. For instance, a typical pension is 3,000 pesos.
Okay, and what does that buy you?
Well, a single carton of 30 eggs costs 3,600 pesos. So your entire monthly pension check won't even buy you a carton of eggs.
It's an economy running on pure fiction. So where is the real business happening?
The real economy, where you buy anything important, medicine, imported food, it all runs on the informal exchange rate, the street rate. And that has collapsed to between 400 and 450 pesos per dollar. That massive gap between the official 24 and the real 450, that tells you the state has lost all monetary sovereignty. They're irrelevant.
So the currency collapse is a symptom. The real disease, the underlying structural failure. That brings us to the invisible elephant in the room, GAESA, the military-run conglomerate. This is where the story turns to, frankly, corruption and resource hoarding.
GAESA, yeah. The Grupo de Administración Empresarial, the sources are pretty clear. They call it a state within a state. It's an oligarchy. It's run by high-level military generals who control all the profitable parts of the economy, and they operate completely outside of the civilian government's control.
Okay, so to really grasp the power dynamic, you have to quantify it. How much of the Cuban economy does this military shadow government actually control?
The consensus among analysts is somewhere between 60 and 70% of the entire national economy.
60 to 70%.
We're talking tourism, imports, exports, all of it. Its gross profits alone account for about 37% of Cuba's total GDP.
So a third of the country's entire economic output is controlled by this military entity. But the most shocking part is its secrecy, right? Its opacity.
Absolutely. There is zero transparency. GAESA doesn't get audited by the government. It pays no taxes. And this is the crucial part. It transfers no dividends to the state budget.
Zero.
Zero. So the official state, the one that's supposed to run hospitals and power plants, is completely starved of cash.
Meanwhile, the sources estimate GAESA revenues are more than 3 times greater than the entire annual state budget.
And this is the core of the betrayal. While the country is broke, GAESA is reportedly sitting on liquid dollar reserves of an astonishing $14.5 billion.
Wait, let's just pause on that number. $14.5 billion. If they have the money to buy diesel, to buy food, to fix the grid, why don't they just spend it and stabilize the country? Don't they realize the whole system is collapsing around their luxury hotels?
That is the defining question of this crisis. The sources suggest GAESA is acting like a corporate holding company that's stripping the assets from a failing subsidiary. The military faction seems to have decided the state is a lost cause, so they're hoarding their cash for their own survival. They keep the dollars, while the civilian state gets the debt and the chaos.
And you see this distortion everywhere. The national electric grid is in total failure because there's no money for maintenance. But GAESA is still financing new luxury hotels.
Hotels that are empty. Tourism occupancy is down to like 12 or 15%. They're building for a future that isn't coming, while the present is literally going dark.
And this has created a fracture at the very top.
A huge one. The 2024 purge of the economy minister, Alejandro Gil, is seen as the military just scapegoating the civilian technocrats. They're blaming them for a crisis caused by GAESA's own refusal to release its funds. The military elite is basically eating the Communist Party bureaucracy to save itself.
So you have this internally rotten, bankrupt state. Then comes the external blow that pulls the plug. The U.S. intervention in Venezuela, Operation Southern Spear.
And the effect was immediate. Venezuela's subsidized oil, which was about 35,000 to 50,000 barrels a day, it just stopped.
Completely.
Cuba needs about 100,000 barrels a day to function. It only produces 40,000 itself. So that created a massive instant deficit they had no way to fill.
And it wasn't just about crude oil, was it? It was the refined products, specifically diesel. That's what triggered this zero-diesel scenario they're in now.
Precisely. The diesel is what runs the backup power generators all over the island. Without that fuel, the whole grid faces structural failure.
Which guarantees the 20-hour blackouts.
Yeah.
And once that happens, the dominoes fall fast.
They do. Hospitals, water sanitation, and maybe most importantly for the hunger crisis,
Yeah.
the cold storage for what little food there is, it all fails. You go from an energy crisis to a public health and a food crisis instantly.
And this really highlights the point that there is no new socialist lifeline coming for them. There's no replacement patron.
They're geopolitically cornered, Russia and China. They can't or won't step in like the Soviets or Venezuela did. Russia is completely bogged down in Ukraine.
And China has become purely transactional.
Exactly. China wants to be repaid. They've actually canceled sugar import contracts because Cuba couldn't deliver. Beijing is watching its own balance sheet, not propping up a failing state for ideological reasons.
And on top of that, the U.S. has made sure that commercial help is impossible.
Yes. The U.S. naval quarantine, plus keeping Cuba on the state sponsors of terrorism list, it makes it legally and commercially toxic for anyone else like Mexico or big oil companies to step in and sell them fuel. The U.S. has effectively sealed them off.
I think the most tragic symbol of this whole industrial collapse is the sugar industry. What does its state tell us?
It's a story of industrial extinction. Cuba, once the world's sugar bowl, produced less than 200,000 tons in the last harvest. To give you some scale, that's a production level from the mid-1800s, before modern machinery.
So they've gone from a world-leading exporter to producing less than a single large farm in the U.S. might.
Pretty much. The industry is functionally extinct. No fuel, no parts, no investment. And now they have to import sugar they can't afford, which just deepens the debt and the food crisis.
So when all these failures reach critical mass, what's the outcome for society? Our sources point to this massive loss of human capital and a complete fracturing of the social contract.
That exodus of 2.7 million people, it's a permanent loss of the country's future. It's the working age adults. This has created a dependency ratio the state just can't support. You have a massive elderly population with a shrinking workforce. The state is just dissolving through mass exit.
And for those who remain, the descent is just raw survival. It's not organized. It's just a reaction to the lights going out.
The repression is still there, of course, but desperation is starting to overcome fear, and the analytical projections for what comes next are, well, they're bleak. They focus on how the state just disintegrates.
What are the main collapse scenarios that analysts are projecting? It sounds like neither is a good outcome.
The current path, with the highest probability, about 55%, is something they call Haitianization. The central government loses control because it can't project power. Police cars don't have fuel. The island just fragments into local fiefdoms run by corrupt officials or gangs.
And the other scenario involves GAESA, the military, finally making its move.
That's the 30% chance of a palace coup. The military elite steps in to install an authoritarian kleptocracy. Their goal wouldn't be about communist ideology anymore. It would be about implementing just enough ruthless capitalist reform to save their own dollarized assets and keep their hotel businesses stable. They would sacrifice the party to save their cash.
Okay, so let's just unpack this one last time. The Cuban regime, weakened by decades of socialist central planning and just hollowed out by the corruption of GAESA, hoarding $14.5 billion, was finally pushed over the edge by the strategic removal of its Venezuelan energy lifeline.
And that leads to the essential, provocative question the sources leave us with. The future seems to be one of two painful, undemocratic outcomes: fragmentation or a hard military takeover. So the question is, will that military financial elite, GAESA, finally choose to jettison the Communist Party and implement a ruthless, authoritarian capitalist model just to protect their own vast dollarized assets? Their survival now might depend on destroying the very ideology they pretend to serve.
And what really stands out to you in all this is the sheer vulnerability of a centralized economic model when it collides with the hard realities of global energy politics. This story really shows that a state's collapse often doesn't happen with a bang. It happens when the systems that deliver the most basic services simply run out of energy. It's a chilling lesson in how infrastructure and money will always trump rhetoric.